Hello, 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 and welcome back to my channel. I have another video for you, and today I thought I would talk about common mistakes that students make when studying. I know that exam period is around the corner for many of you, and I actually thought that I'll do like a condensed video just talking about some common mistakes, but I would like to actually expand on this a bit further. So if that's something that's interesting to you, then let me know down in the comments. So let's get started. Okay, so the first common mistake that I see students make, firstly, is going into the exam not being comfortable with all of the topics that they've been taught. Now, this comes through, I think this is caused by perhaps a lack of understanding in how you should be approaching your studying throughout the semester as you're working through your course material. So for any course that you're doing, right, you should have a study file for each subject that you're busy working with. And it is important that you maintain the study file. And I know I'm saying this now and you're saying, but it's the end of the semester, I haven't had time to do that. It's never too late to start. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to make sure that all the material related to your course you can find neatly in one place so that you're able to refer to it. And then you want to arrange it such that you can go through the material and you are able to tick off the learning objectives for all of the modules that you've done or that you are going to be examined on. And you want to make sure as you're reviewing these learning objectives that you do understand how to do whatever the learning objective is referring to, right? And so if you identify anything from just browsing the learning objectives that you think that you are not comfortable with, that is something that you flag and that is something that you come back to. So how do you come back to that? Well, what I mean by that is that you are going to then read over your notes on that topic very carefully before you end up attempting questions, because I think a lot of times students also want to jump into the questions because they think it's all about practice, and I'll talk about that on a later slide. But before you even get to the point where you're ready to practice, you want to make sure that you do have a proper understanding of the theory that you're dealing with, because if you don't have a proper understanding with the theory and then you start practicing a question, the problem then arises is if you don't do well in that question that you've practiced, is it because you have poor exam technique, or is it because you don't really know the topic, right? You aren't sure at that point because you haven't gotten yourself to a point with the theory where you can say, I actually know this really well. So my problem now that I have was because my exam technique was poor, or there was some other integration that I was not able to understand, or whatever the case may be, right? So it's important that you tick off those learning objectives, make sure that you're comfortable with all of the material before jumping into practicing your questions. Then on the topic of practicing questions, so another thing that I can't even tell you how many students get this wrong. And I think when I started studying, I was exactly the same way until I realized I was driving myself insane by doing this. So it's this focus on quantity rather than quality. So what do I mean? Right? So as students, we are prone to want to do as many questions as possible, because essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to spot what could be in the exam. So we're thinking, if I see every different permutation of this question, then they have to ask me one of these in the exam and then I'll know it. But that's the worst way to study, because there's always a new way of asking or examining a particular topic. So you cannot go in thinking that you've seen everything, because if you're confronted with something that you haven't seen, then it's going to completely shake your confidence in the exam, and you can't afford to have your confidence, shaken. So I think it's important that you then steer yourself away from, trying to spot. And I realized this, I think, when I realized this, I will never forget, I was in GDA when I realized that getting through quantity was not going to work for me, right? Because For those that have been through PGDA or are currently in PGDA, you know exactly what I mean, right? There are so many questions that are coming at you every week, and you don't know how to keep on top of all of the material, right? And because you can't keep on top of it, you have so much anxiety about the fact that you're not getting through all the work. But what I found was that it was better for me to have done 2 tuts that I attempted properly, and when I made mistakes, I investigated those mistakes and I really focused on understanding where I went wrong than it was for me to go through 10 tuts that I was doing at a surface level. Because when you're doing tutorials or any sort of practice questions at a surface level, you're never going to learn that way, because you're only going to get bits and pieces. But if you zone in on a few questions that are covering quite a good breadth of the course, and you can focus in on understanding those questions and really attempting them properly, then I think you're going to be in a much better space than if you were surface level learning. And if you want me to chat more about, you know, how you work on questions and how you actually what I mean when I say you need to learn them properly, right? Not surface level. Let me know, and I will do another video if that is something that sounds interesting to you. Okay, so next thing is managing your reading time poorly. So this doesn't really apply to everybody, because not every student gets reading time, but every student in the exam does need to read the scenario. Okay, and so what I find here is that some students tend to rush through the scenario because they just want to get to the questions. And in some exams, it may be appropriate for you to read the required beforehand, just to get an understanding of what it is that you're going to be required to do, because then it also helps focus your reading time. And so with that, I would say, you know, that's applicable in some instances, and in some instances it's not that ideal, but that is a whole nother tangent I can go off onto. But essentially here, what you want to do is, when you are studying, you need to practice that you are also reading your scenario carefully. And what I like to do is I like to highlight strategically. So you get your highlighters, and you can have highlighters because you have different colors, and you can highlight certain things in different colors. So one thing that I would do is, if something in the question told me I was not required to do that, I would highlight that in a specific color, because that would pop out to me to be like, don't address that, because the question is not asking me to do that. So be creative, be strategic in the way that you highlight. And when I say strategic, don't go and highlight every single thing, because not every single thing in the paragraph may be relevant. You don't want to end up with a whole paragraph that's highlighted, because then you're basically at the same point where you started. But know what you're looking for, and if necessary, if you're dealing with paragraphs that are dense, try and summarize things, write them in the margin as you're reading. But that all comes with practice. So that's something that you specifically practice as you're going through your questions. Okay, and then the next thing is not planning the answer. Now, this is a common mistake that happens sort of at higher levels. So the higher you go in your accounting related subjects, this becomes more and more problematic. But the idea here is that when you are answering a question, you want to have a high level idea of what it is that you want to say, right? So you don't want to jump into the question and then just start writing because you feel like you're racing against the clock. Okay, so on the topic of racing against the clock, okay, make sure that you are keeping track of your time and that you're writing down next to different questions, what time you're supposed to end that question, so that you know that you're managing your time properly in that sense. But having said that, you also do need to plan how you're going to answer your question. So let's say, for example, you have a theory question, and this theory question is asking you whether or not, it's asking you how you would account for a particular asset. So then in your planning of your high level, I would say like your high level approach to the question. And this is something I jot down in my exam book, right? Because you've got the paper there, so use it. So kind of just jot down, right? So if it's an asset, you're probably going to go through maybe asset definition. So I'll write there, okay, asset definition, and then recognition criteria. And then maybe you would also discuss the nature of the asset, so is it inventory, PPE, intangible asset, whatever the case may be. And then specific words, trigger certain actions in your solution. So if they ask for the accounting treatment, then you're going to go through maybe the key things, so what's the accounting policy, what's done at initial recognition, subsequent measurement, etc., etc. But yeah, whatever the nature of the question is, just have a high level idea of what it is that you want to say. Jot that in your book, and you can always turn to the next page and start writing, but don't be afraid to use the paper. And it also just send such a good signal to the examiner, when they're looking at your script and they can see, wow, the student has really, thought about the approach. It just leaves such a good impression on the examiner when you are planning your work. Yeah. Okay, so the next thing is not setting boundaries with time. Now, this is very important, and this is something that I think is ongoing. I have a video actually on time management if you want to watch that, so I will put the link somewhere, I don't know where, on how to manage your time. But I would say the first and foremost is, when it comes to studying, you have to prioritize yourself. Okay, so remember, when we study or when we're writing exams, it's just for a short period of time. And after that period of time, you can go and, do whatever you want to do after that. So you can then go and do things with your friends, do things with your family. Let's say you're working at the same time as you're studying, you can then put in, 110% at work if that's what you want to do. But during your study time, it's really important that you do prioritize that period, because you only have that period to prepare yourself for the exam period, which is fixed, and it's not going away. So prioritize yourself, because you only have one shot to make it count, and that's more important than anything else, right? So you can do everything, all the fun, all the other work, all of that can wait until the exam, but make sure that you're prioritizing yourself. And in saying that, right, prioritizing yourself and learning to set boundaries, I found that what was really useful for me was having a study timetable. And I would just do a study timetable in Excel, right, where I have all of the days from day one of the study break all the way to the final exam that I'm writing. And you kind of plot all the dates. So you'll you'll put in your study timetable, okay, I'm writing maths at this block over here, and then I'm writing accounting, then I'm writing Manac, whatever the case may be. And then you plan your study days around that. And you have to be smart in how you set up your study timetable. And I suppose I could do a whole nother video on how to do a study timetable. But you want to make sure that you are planning what you're going to do on a particular day, and that you're actually sticking to that plan. And I'm not saying that if for some reason, on one day it doesn't work out because perhaps you are not feeling too well on the day, or, life just happens. But at some point you do have to hold yourself accountable to your study timetable because that is really important. So think about your study timetable. Ask a friend, to come to give you some ideas as well. Ask them what they are doing. If you have a study group or so, ask your lecturer, how they would plan their own study timetable. Whatever it is, do your study timetable, stick to it, and prioritize that timetable to prioritize you. Okay, and the last, and this is like the biggest mistake that I think this is the biggest thing that students are wrong, and this is not confronting past mistakes. And if you've been in a lecture with me, you know that I often talk, I don't say often, okay, I do talk about this, because I feel this is so important when it comes to learning, right? Learning is an incredibly uncomfortable space, and it's meant to be, right? Because if you think about a pearl, right? I don't know if you know anything about how a pearl is formed, but it's basically like a grain of sand, that gets into the shell, and then because of well, I don't know, I'm not going to explain this well, but anyway, it's because it causes some little irritation, and then that results in this pearl being formed, right? So it's the same way with learning, right? It's this uncomfortable thing because we don't like being in a position where we feel like we are not in control, and learning does that, right? Because suddenly you are faced with the unknown, and you kind of have to figure it out. You don't necessarily have control. So embrace that. Okay, don't run away from it. Embrace it. It is what it is. Learning is about being uncomfortable. Now, in understanding that learning is about being uncomfortable, right? If you have previous tests that you've written, exams, you're going through it, all of those things are relevant when you are studying, because if you've written a test on the topic before, and you didn't get 100% for that, which is probably always the case, right? It means that there were areas that you didn't fully understand, and so you made mistakes. So in that sense, what you need to do there is you need to look at the mistakes, and you need to be honest with yourself. This isn't a case of you saying, oh, that was a stupid mistake. Oh, I would have done that. I did actually know that. Making a whole lot of excuses. The reality is that you didn't do it. You probably don't know it, and that is what you need to confront yourself with, right? So don't blame, oh, it was the time, oh, it was the venue, oh, it was this, that, or the other. No, it was the fact that you didn't know how to address with that. And the sooner you take ownership of that, the easier it's going to be for you to be able to confront your mistakes. And also know that it's not a reflection of who you are, right? Even if you failed a test before, it's not a reflection of whether you're a good or a bad person. It just means that at the time, you weren't ready to do that question, right? So all you need to do now is get yourself ready. So you look at your mistakes and you really go and identify what were the principles that I was not understanding when I did this question, and go and learn them. And when you do that and you learn to confront your mistakes, then that is like 90% of the journey towards becoming successful. Okay, so I mean, this video is already a bit long, longer than I was expecting it to be, but I hope that it was useful for you. And if you want me to do more videos in the next week or so, just on studying and stuff like that, let me know, and I will make sure that I upload things so that you have content available to assist you in your preparation for the exam. Yeah, so on that note, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.